9,000 years ago, in the area corresponding to modern-day Pakistan, one of the oldest civilizations was born. It was the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization. The Indus built water supply systems, two-story houses in pools long before other nations learned to do it. That said, in their entire existence, they didn't once go to war. However, in 1300 BC, the entire Indus civilization suddenly disappeared, leaving behind nothing but rocks, fire damage, as if after a powerful explosion in the area remains contaminated with radiation and scattered around the streets, as if death came to them out of the blue. At the same time, the ancient Indian ethics describe a flash as brilliant as 1,000 suns that could destroy an entire civilization. It feels like someone destroyed the ancient Indus civilization with an atomic bomb. Could it really have perished in a nuclear war? Now imagine if a nuclear apocalypse struck the entire planet 9,000 years ago. Humanity would have had to survive in harsh conditions and evolve into mighty warriors like in Raid Shadow Legends. Then our world would be populated by 15 factions, from terrifying undead to majestic elves, and everyone could become a legendary hero, testing their strength in 12 dungeons with unique bosses and loot. And until we evolved into lizardmen in Raid Shadow Legends, you can play on your PC or mobile device. In addition to dungeons, the game features 3 PvP modes. Just power up your hero and watch the enemy's health bars gradually diminish. That's what I meant. Don't forget to include my favorite giant Gurgo in your team. You can replace your enemies' buffs with the freeze debuff, forcing them to skip a turn. And if you love a challenge, the game has just added a deadly Aquamori, the Phantom Shogun. This undead general guards a valuable treasure accessory, Ascension, a new feature that allows you to upgrade your gear. And for deeper immersion in the lore, check out the Raid Shadow Legends YouTube channel and watch the limited animated series Raid Call of the Arbiter, or jump right into the action. Click the link below the video or use the QR code to get your bonuses in raids such as the Epic Champion, Knight Errant XP boosters, energy refills, and a skill tome. And now let me tell you what really happened to the Harappan civilization 200 years ago. Explorer Charles Mason visited the province of Punjab, modern-day Pakistan, where he discovered the remains of an ancient city. It turned out to be Harappa, one of the capital cities of the Indus. Excavation revealed that the first settlements existed there as early as in the 7th millennium BC. As for its territory, the civilization spread over the entire valley of the river Indus with an area of around 1 million square kilometers. It compares to modern-day Bolivia. At its height, the Indus civilization had a population of almost 5 million people. This is more than the combined populations of its 3 contemporaries, namely Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, and ancient China. Almost 100 years after the discovery of Harappa, an archaeological excavation revealed another large city, Mohenjo-Daro. Its name means Mound of the Dead Men. Around 3035 people lived in the city, and by the standards of the 2nd millennium BC, it was a city of the future. It was there that people invented toilets, and these were not hits in backyards but full-blown rooms and houses connected to a drainage system. The city itself was divided into 2 parts. The lower part of Mohenjo-Daro was residential. The streets were all built according to the same scheme, north to south and east-west, and along the buildings there were jugs for people to throw away trash, similar to our bins or garbage cans today. The upper part was the citadel. It had a grain silo, a trading quarter, baths, and an enormous public water tank. It was 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and 3 meters deep. A layer of tar on its floor kept the tank watertight. A giant barrel with rainwater was placed nearby. Fresh water would be led into the tank through ducts, and dirty water would be drained out through the gutters in the drainage system. Due to this, the water in the tank was always fresh, and this was at a time when people didn't even know how to smelt iron. The Indus civilization also had its own writing system. Scientists have managed to recover ceramic tablets, also known as seals. These tablets depicted various animals, deities, and symbols which haven't been deciphered yet. The only thing that scientists have figured out is that being this rope from right to left, but the meaning of the strange hieroglyphs and the purpose of the tablet still remains a mystery. And it's not the only puzzle that the Harappan civilization left behind. The thing is, Mohenjo-Daro was surrounded by a high wall. Historians assumed that in case of danger, the citizens could take shelter in the spacious citadel, but all those precautions were meant to protect the city not from enemy raids but from floods. Moreover, the Indus civilization had absolutely no weapons or army. That said, the people weren't isolated and engaged in active trade with their neighbors, for example with Mesopotamia. Around 2600 BC, Mesopotamian tablets started mentioning trade with a faraway land. Gold, silver, copper and lapis lazuli were brought from that land to Mesopotamia. What's curious is that the Indus exported their goods by sea. This indicates that they had a commercial fleet where prosperous developed cities and precious metal mines, but no army. How is it that this rich civilization didn't ever become a target for any invaders in its entire existence? Apparently the Indus leaders mastered the art of diplomacy. After all, the modern world is not devoid of examples of conflicts that were resolved not by war. Say in 1978, US President Jimmy Carter managed to settle the conflict between Egypt and Israel. For 30 years these two nations had fought 4 wars against each other. In late 70s, when the peace talks reached a dead end, Carter invited the Israeli Prime Minister and the President of Egypt to a 2-week-long meeting. After that, no more armed conflicts broke out between the countries. It's possible that the Indus civilization, which marched ahead of its time, boasted diplomats as good as Jimmy Carter, but even that didn't save it from the terrible catastrophe. In 1300 BC, the Indus Valley civilization simply vanished. All they left behind were city ruins and mysterious tablets. But where could an entire civilization have disappeared to? Scientists aren't sure why the Indus just vanished suddenly. Some researchers tend to blame the river which started to dry out. This brought about a drought which forced the Indus to move to the plains of the river Ganges, where they mixed with other peoples over the years. According to another theory, the Indus disappeared when they cut down all the forests in the area. They needed lumber to fire bricks, which they used to build cities. Eventually forests were cleared and the area turned into a desert. Fields were plagued by the drought and the civilization left the Indus Valley. Another version is that the urban population perished in a cholera or malaria epidemic, but all of these theories have the same downside. Excavations didn't reveal anything that would corroborate them. In fact, the Saraswati River might well turn out to be the stuff of legend. It was described in an epic, but no one knows whether it existed in real life. On the other hand, archaeologists did find something truly bizarre. Back in 1922, during scientists stumbled upon the remains of around 40 bodies in the lower city. Some of the skeletons were found lying at strange unnatural poses as if their deaths were sudden, but that wasn't all. In 1977, researcher David Davenport studied the excavation site and discovered a hollow 50 meters in diameter. All the rocks inside it seemed to have melted and turned into a glassy mass, but that could have only been caused by extremely high temperatures, no less than 1500 degrees Celsius. One might think Mohenjo-Daro witnessed an explosion almost as powerful as a nuclear one, and this may turn out to be true. Archaeologists working in the state of Rajasthan in northwest India discovered a layer of radioactive dust defined as just 700 kilometers away from Mohenjo-Daro. A radioactive cloud could well have traveled level such a distance after a nuclear explosion. Besides, traces of radiation were also found in the city itself. Researchers measured the radiation background of some of the body remains and found out it was 50 times above normal. Moreover, the ancient Indian epic Mahabharata contains mentions of a powerful explosion with the brilliance of 10,000 suns that could burn entire nations. All signs point to a nuclear explosion in Mohenjo-Daro, which happened thousands of years before nuclear power plants and weapons. But how could that be possible? We might get closer to solving the mystery if we look into the Oklo uranium deposit in Gabon, Africa. In 1972, uranium processing plant workers in France noticed that the ore from the Okla mine was slightly different. The thing is, all deposits on Earth store the same amount of uranium-235. The atoms of this isotope always make up 0.720 of the material's mass in the samples mined, and oak blow contained 0.003 less than that. This meant that the ore in this deposit was somehow stripped of around 200 kilograms of uranium. This amount is enough to make almost 5 nuclear bombs. But where could this uranium isotope have gone? Paul Corota, professor of chemistry at the University of Arkansas, calculated that 2 billion years ago the proportion of uranium-235 in the deposit was as high as 3%. That was enough to turn the Okla mine into a natural nuclear reactor. Corota assumed that such a reactor operated in cycles. When groundwater reached the deposit, it would turn on for half an hour. When the water evaporated because the reactor heated up, the process stopped, resuming again after about 2.5 hours, and these cycles went on for 500,000 years. During that time, about 10 tons of uranium-235 decayed in the Auckland natural reactor. Assuming assuming that a reactor like that existed somewhere close to Mohenjo-Daro, it might have caused the nuclear explosion that destroyed the Indus civilization. But one thing doesn't add up. The Indus stories describe something more than just a powerful explosion. The Mahabharata speaks of a weapon that provoked the explosion. In addition, it gives every detail of the aftermath of using that weapon. Survivors lost their hair and nails in the ground and food became infected. But what if the nuclear explosion in Mohenjo-Daro wasn't an accident? 1,000 years after the Indus civilization disappeared, Ashoka, the ruler of the Maurya Empire, emerged in its place, decided to create a secret society. Ashoka believed that some secret knowledge from the past could destroy his empire. Wanting to keep all knowledge away from the masses, he summoned the 9 unknown men. The empire's 9 wisest people were to write 9 books that contained all breakthrough knowledge of the past and the present. Those 9 books were on microbiology, cosmology, physiology, gravity, sociology, propaganda, light communication, and alchemy. Incidentally, to say that the knowledge recorded in those books was ahead of its time would be an understatement. Some things described there are even more than modern scientists now. For instance, the physiology book describes the touch of death technique that teaches to kill with a single touch. Legend has it that the information leaked from this book formed the basis for the martial art of judo. Communication book suggests the 9 unknown men knew that aliens existed. The book on light describes the use of light as a weapon in China today, even claims to be using anti-gravity laws from the gravity volume for research. But what's even more interesting is that the 9 unknown men knew about radiation and could even exploit it in their interest. It was as early as in 1879 that French writer Louis Jacquelot, in his book called Occult Science in India, theorized that one of the 9 unknown men's books described a water sanitation technique based on exposure to radiation. The author believed the river Ganges was proof of it. After all, Jacquelot claimed that despite all the sewage and other mud that ends up in it, the river remains clean. Modern day researchers confirmed that too. Take for example Pradeep Bhargava, a hydrology professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Reasoning is that while river water usually contains lots of microorganisms and bacteria that exhaust oxygen reserves, this is not the case with the Ganges. Professor Bhargava claims that the river has 25 times more oxygen than any other river in the world. It may suggest that something destroys microorganisms and disinfects the water, but modern day science doesn't know what it is exactly. What if the 9 unknown men actually possessed knowledge about radiation and they store the information from the books for centuries too? If so, it's not at all surprising that at the time of the Indus civilization, people could use radioactive decay and radiation for their benefit, and it's possible that the Indus used that knowledge not only for water sanitation. If the Indus civilization had the first prototypes of nuclear weapons, that would explain many historical inconsistencies like the absence of an army or defensive structures in Mohenjo-Daro. After all, why build defensive walls and feed hundreds of soldiers if you have a weapon that can obliterate your enemy's entire army? Okay, but how come a post-explosion crater was discovered in one of the main cities of the Indus civilization? Could it be that nuclear weapons were in the arsenals of the Indus enemy too? In fact, the inventions of ancient Indian civilizations were so incredible that nuclear weapons don't seem that impossible by comparison. For example, the local epic gives a comprehensive description of flying machines that could even be used for space travel. Those were called Vimanas. The first mentions of flying chariots were really early and can be found in the Ramayana, an ancient Indian epic written between 800 and 300 BC. Dimna is a pyramid-like aircraft with a round face. Its interior is divided into several levels with potholes in its walls and a dome above. The ancient Indian epic says the Manas flew as fast as the wind and emitted a melodious sound. There were actually several types of Vimanas, which differed in shape and interior. Some Indian temples look like these flying objects from the outside. Maybe people saw those chariots in the sky and reflected them in buildings on the ground. After all, according to local beliefs, Vimanas were used by the gods themselves. And still, Professor Dilip Kumar Kanjalal from the Calcutta Sanskrit College, who specializes in ancient languages, believes that the Manas may have existed in real life. He says they were powered by mercury vortex engines. You see, when mercury heats up, it rather takes away from the heat source. This allows the turbine to rotate, and the energy generated as a result can be used to fly. The Mahabharata, written between 400 BC and 400 AD, describes of the mana set in motion by lightning. The chariot could not only fly but also reach the upper layers of the atmosphere, and even space legends tell of gods flying out there to fight demons. One of those battles even happened on the moon. It's described in great detail in the Ramayana, and according to the epic, it was a mana that the gods used to reach the moon. And although it's just a legend, strange out of place artifacts are indeed found on the moon from time to time. For example, when in 1971 Apollo 14 delivered lunar rock samples, scientists found a piece that had found its way to the moon from Earth. According to David Craig, a lunar geologist from the Lunar and Planetary Institute in Houston, that rock formed on our planet around 4.5 billion years ago. But how did it end up on the moon? Scientists cannot give a definitive answer to this question. The common belief is that a piece of rock was knocked out by a meteorite impact around 150 million years after it was formed. Since the moon used to be 3 times closer to us back then than it is now, pieces of rocks from Earth ended up on its surface, but then this rock would have had to remain intact on the moon for billions of years. Perhaps a friend man could have landed there with the Fimna. But if you still doubt that Vamanas could actually exist to be in fly into space, take a look at the Dragon spacecraft. SpaceX designed this spacecraft to deliver people in cargo to Earth's orbit. Its shape is very similar to the shape of the heavenly chariot from ancient Indian legends, but according to the epic, the manas were used not only for air and space travel. Some of them could be turned into weapons, dropping single projectiles from the sky on enemy cities. Legends describe them as charged with all the power of the universe, leaving behind poles of smoke and fire as bright as thousands of suns. One such projectile was powerful enough to destroy an entire civilization. Vimanas that fly into space and drop nuclear bombs on enemy cities. I mean, this may sound too incredible, but all this was described in the ancient in the Olympics, and that means even thousands of years ago humans were contemplating flights to the moon and the possibilities of using nuclear energy for both peaceful and non-peaceful purposes. So do you still think our ancestors believed the sky was a solid dome? And while you are trying to process what you've just seen, let me remind you the link in the description has bonuses waiting for you in Raid Shadow Legends.